In this video, we will set up a monthly budget worksheet. To get here, I clicked on the January tab for January, and I have already filled in this budget ahead of time. The first thing you see, starting from the top, is the summary table that shows you all of the main categories in your budget. The first is income and benefits, which is income you receive through any of the income categories in the general ledger. This is followed by taxes paid, charitable gifts, money you set aside in savings and investments, debt payments, reimbursables, regular expenses, which are expenses you incur every month, and annual or occasional expenses, which are expenses you incur only once or a few times during the year. Your budget balance is what is left over from your income and benefits after you have assigned amounts to each of the other 6 budget categories. The column marked as percentage of income tells you the percentage of your income that goes toward paying each of the budget allocations. It tells you how much of your earnings are assigned toward paying down debt, for example, something often referred to as your debt ratio. Use this setting when your only source of money to spend in your budget comes from income. You can change this setting to as percentage of inflows in either the actual column or the planned column just by clicking on the check box as percentage of inflows in both places, like this. Your inflows refers to all of the money that comes into your budget from all sources that is available to be assigned a task in your budget. There are 6 main sources of inflows in your budget. Your income is only one of the 6. The others include the following: a tax refund, which would show up as a negative number in the taxes paid category; money you transfer into your checking account from a savings account or from an investment account for spending, which would show up as a negative number in the savings and investment category; money you borrow from a loan or a credit card, which would show up as a negative number in the debt payments category; and a reimbursement payment given to you, which will show up as a negative number in the reimbursables category. If you have money coming into your budget from one of these other sources in addition to your income, then you may want to use the as percentage of inflows setting. You can use the as percentage of outflows setting, which I'll show you here. You just click on the checkbox again and select as percentage of outflows. And you may use this setting when you want to see each main category as a percentage of the total dollars that get assigned in the budget, rather than the total dollars available to you. It tells you how much of your total budget outflows go toward regular monthly expenses, for example. If you don't have a large budget balance left over at the end of the month, then you'll get roughly the same numbers as you would for the other settings. So this is only useful when you have a large budget balance left over of unassigned dollars at the end of the month. I'm going to set this back to as percentage of income just for now. Underneath the summary table is the area where you can set budgeted amounts for each of the subcategories within these 7 main categories. The subcategories are drawn directly from the general ledger. They are already set up for you here. If you want to change any of the subcategories, you can, but you have to change them in the general ledger, not here in the budget worksheet. If you don't want to use all of the subcategories, that will work too. Maybe you only want one insurance subcategory, for example, rather than 4 or 5 different types of insurance that are listed by default. If you make that change in the general ledger, then when you come to the monthly budget, you'll see a number of blank rows, in which case you can hide those rows in the budget worksheet if you prefer. And I'll just show you how to do that. If you came down to the insurance categories, there's auto insurance, life insurance, property insurance, health insurance, other insurance. Let's just say you only wanted one insurance category. You could hide the others just by selecting the row and then with your left mouse button and then scrolling down, selecting the other rows, and then clicking the right mouse button anywhere in the shaded area and selecting hide, and you can hide those so that they don't show up in your budget. and I'll just unhide them. Unhide them is just the same way, except you right click in the shaded area and then select unhide. Okay? Now the actual amounts in the budget worksheet are pre-populated with data from the general ledger. The actual column tells you what has been actually spent or received so far in that month. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top here. For January, as long as you have indicated a 1, number 1, in the month column beside each transaction in the general ledger, and I'll just go back and show you what I mean. If you just go to the general ledger, here in the month column, you've entered a 1 next to all of these transactions. As long as you've done that, then the amounts from those transactions will show up in the actual column of your budget worksheet beside its respective category. The planned column tells you what you have planned to spend or receive in each category. The planned column is what you fill in yourself. To the left of the planned column is a details column where you can enter any details for the planned budget amount, such as the name of your utilities company or the type of extracurricular activity involved, if you wish to include that detail. So I'll just scroll down here to the utilities area and I'll show you what I mean. Under telecom, there are two rows that you can put in here under telecom in your budget, and I just put mobile phone in one and cable and internet in the other, and that just allows you to break it down a little bit. Same with rent and utilities. You could put heating and electricity in one, and if you maybe had those utility bills separate, you could separate them out into two lines. Or if you didn't have a mortgage and instead you were paying rent, you could put rent on one line, and then you could put all of your utilities on the other line. To the right of the planned column is the difference between the actual amount and the planned amount in each category. Difference amounts highlighted in blue are under budget, meaning your planned amounts have not yet been reached. Difference amounts highlighted in red are over budget. Being over budget in the income and benefits area is a good thing. It means you earned more money than you planned for. When you see an over budget alert there, just increase the planned amount to match the actual amount in that case. If I scroll back up to the top, and let's say I have here our planned amount as being $7,500, but let's say that we had originally planned only $6,500, and you see a red minus $1,000 in the difference column. That tells us, hey, you earned more money in the month than you planned on. When that happens, just simply come into the planned column and increase it to $7,500. And that makes that difference amount go away. Being over budget in the other areas means you've overspent. That tells you that you need to decrease the planned amount in some other category in order to compensate for the overspending in this category. So if I scroll down to one of the expense areas, and let's just go to the groceries one just for an example. It's here under personal living expenses, and it's groceries, and we have here planned amount of $1,200, and what's actually been spent is $1,000, and that shows a difference amount of $200 in blue, which means we still have $200 left in our budget to spend. But let's say, just for the sake of argument, that we had planned only to spend $800 on groceries. And if that had been the case, now we see that we've actually spent $1,000 and we've overspent by $200 in this category. That appears here as a red, minus $200. In that case, what we would have to do is decrease our planned spending in some other category to compensate for this overspending. What we would have to do is go to maybe our fun and entertainment area, or maybe eating out. One of these other areas we would have to reduce what we had planned to spend in order to compensate. The other alternative is that if we had a sizable budget balance left over at the end of the month, we might not need to compensate in some other area. We just have a lower budget balance because of this overspending. I'm going to change this groceries planned spending back to $1,200. Okay. You'll notice that some categories have more than one row in the budget worksheet, whereas other categories only have one row. This is just for your convenience. For some categories, such as groceries, which is where I'm at right now, it isn't really necessary to record every trip to the grocery store in your budget. For other categories, such as home and garden, you may want to see in your budget that you plan to spend $200 on a new lawnmower, and that you also plan to buy new linens for the house. In that case, there is room to list both of these in your budget under Home and Garden in the Plan section here. The worksheet will then add the two planned amounts together automatically for comparison to the aggregate actual amount that comes from the general ledger. So just as an example, let's say we had planned to spend $200 on a lawnmower and we had planned to spend $100 on new linens. The budget worksheet will add those two amounts together and compare them to the aggregate actual amount and give you a difference of $250, meaning we've already spent $50 on home and garden. We still have $250 of this planned spending to spend. I'm just going to decrease those, or eliminate those now, or delete those, and go back to what I had there before. The cumulative budget balance back at the top of the budget worksheet here includes the budget balance from previous months. So if one month you do end up overspending, but you have built up a large cumulative budget balance, then you'll see that you are still in the black. Here our cumulative budget balance is the same as our budget balance because it's January, and they're the same. Once you get into February, March, April, May, and so on, if you have carried over budget balance from each month, that cumulative budget balance will appear in that row right here. When you make a budget, essentially what you are doing is giving every dollar available to you a job to do, which is either to spend it, pay it against debt owing, loan it out, or save it. Now, as you can see here in the summary table, according to this budget that I've already set up here, we are planning on $7,500 gross income for the month. I've entered $7,500 in the planned column under employment income here. The actual column tells me I have received all $7,500 of that income already. Of that $7,500, we are planning $1,000 of it going to taxes, $750 going to charitable gifts, $700 going to savings and investments, $1,570 going to debt payments, 0 reimbursables, $3,200 going to regular monthly expenses, and 0 under annual or occasional expenses. This leaves our planned budget balance at $110, which is not assigned to anything. We can either give those dollars a job, we could set them aside in a savings account, for example, for a specific savings goal, or we can just keep them in our checking account in reserve to add to our next month's budget. Just remember, the best use of this worksheet is not just to set up your budget once at the start of the month and then forget about it. Your budget is meant to be flexible and able to adjust to changing circumstances in the month. It can tell you when and where you might need to make adjustments on the fly in your budget so that you are able to end the month with your budget balance above 0. As long as you keep up with entering your transactions in the general ledger, your monthly budget can help you continually know whether you are spending more or less in certain areas than you planned on, so that you can adjust your planned spending downward in one area when unplanned expenses come up in other areas. Used this way, your budget becomes a tool that you use to help you be free and stay on top of your finances, rather than as something that takes away your freedom and restricts you. Just some additional information about the budget worksheets. Let's say you have an investment account, and in that account you sell some stocks or mutual funds in January, and as a result of that sell order you end up realizing an investment gain. You'll notice that if you are using the investment account registers in this system to track your investments, that gain is not recorded in the January budget worksheet. The reason for this is that none of the activity inside your investment accounts affects your budget. Only money you move into that account and out of that account affects the amount of dollars that can be assigned a task each month in your budget. I'll show you what I mean. If we go back here to the general ledger, I have in here on January 20th, 2017, an investment purchase minus $350 comes out of my checking account. And if we scroll over to the investment accounts, I have that going into the investment account and purchasing an asset, $350. Now I also have a reinvested dividend that just gets dispersed to the cash balance inside that account of $25 on the same day, it looks like January 20th. And if we go back to the budget worksheet and scroll down to the investments area, this line right here, money put into all investment accounts, it shows $350. That's that money we transferred from the checking over to the investment account, and then inside the investment account we used it to purchase some stocks, $350. And that $25 that appeared, that I showed you, that appeared as a dividend and just was in the cash balance of that account, doesn't appear here in the budget, mostly because we can't use it. You can only use it when you transfer money out of your investment account back into your checking account. So if we go back to the general ledger, and let's say we just February 1st, 2017, and we say transfer from investment account, and we put $25 back into the checking account, and then we scroll over to the investment account here, and we put minus 25 in the under the cash balance column. If we now go over to the February budget, it probably won't, because I need to do it inside the investment account as well. So let's just say February 1st, 2017, and month is 2, and we're going to transfer cash out or something like that, and we're going to go over here to withdraw cash, $25, and that leaves a zero cash balance in the account. If we now go to February, you'll see there is now, it now says money put into all investment accounts. It now has a minus $25 in February. That means we transferred $25 cash from the investment account back into our checking account, and that now appears in our budget worksheet as money that can be allocated to some other expense. The only time that an investment gain or loss appears on your budget worksheet as a gain or loss in the income and benefits section, if I scroll up here, right here in this row right here, or under January, this row right here, is when you are not using one of the investment account registers in the system to track your investment purchases. And instead of using that investment account register, if you go back to the general ledger, you would be using this column right here that is to track investment purchases as an expense outside of an investment account. Another thing to be aware of has to do with carrying a credit card balance. There are two ways you can use a credit card. One is to use it to make purchases and then to pay it off in full by the end of the month or by the end of the billing cycle. to avoid carrying any debt and to avoid any interest charges. For example, let's say you have a credit card with zero balance on it as of January 1. On January 5, you spend $500 on groceries on the card. On January 10, you spend $80 on an oil change for your car. And on January 15th, you spend $120 on your cell phone bill. On January 21, you pay $700 from your checking account to your credit card, leaving a zero balance owing. You pay off the card in full before any interest can be charged to you. If you use your credit card this way, then you are effectively paying for the groceries, the oil change, and the cell phone bill with money from your checking account in the same month that those charges were incurred. You are just using your credit card for convenience. Therefore, your budget worksheets treat those expenses like they were coming from your checking account, not from your credit card. On the credit card register, I'll click on the register here. As long as you have selected no to the question, do you carry a balance owing on this card, right here, that credit card will not show up on your budget worksheet as a separate budget allocation or as a source of inflow, even if you are using it to make purchases. If I go back to the January budget and scroll down to debt payments, that credit card here is blank. Any actual charges, any actual payments on that credit card in the actual column will not appear. That column will be blank. The expenses on that card will appear on your budget because the budget draws its information from all of the expense accounts on the general ledger. The second way to use your credit card is to use it to make purchases and to then carry an outstanding balance owing on the card rather than paying it off in full the same month that the charges were incurred. And it's not recommended to use your card this way. But if you do, let's assume the same scenario as before, only this time you do not pay off the $700 on January 21. Instead, on January 21, you incur an additional $20 interest charge. If this happens, you are effectively borrowing $720 from your credit card in January to pay for your family's expenses in January, including the interest owing. And that will show up here as a negative number in the actual column. As long as you have, in the credit card register, you have selected yes to the question, do you carry a balance owing on this card? If we go back to the January budget worksheet. Then, let's say in February, you incur an additional $1,000 in regular monthly expenses and charge that to your card. And then on February 20th, you pay that $1,000 off in full, plus an additional $200, which goes toward paying down the balance from the previous month. On February 21st, your credit card incurs an additional interest charge of $20. Now you have a balance owing as of February 28th of $540. In your credit card register, you'd have a balance owing of $540 if this was the scenario. And in the February budget worksheet, it will show that you have effectively paid a net $180 toward paying down the outstanding principal on that card. That $180 will appear as an additional budget allocation in the credit card row of your budget worksheet for February, over and above all of the other expenses you might have in February. Also be aware that transfers to your savings account from your checking account show up on your budget worksheet as a positive allocation in the savings account section right here. Transfers from your savings accounts back to your checking account show up as a negative number in this area and represent an additional inflow into your budget. Same with a reimbursable. If we scroll down to the reimbursables area right here, an expense you incur as a reimbursable shows up as a positive number in the reimbursables area of your budget worksheet. A reimbursement payment back to you shows up as a negative number in the reimbursables area. And just finally, you can print your budget just by going up here to File and Print, and it prints out on 3 pages, which you can see here. Okay. Also on this budget worksheet, you'll see this red line. That just means that basically anything to the left of that red line is what's going to print. What is on the right of that line is just some additional instructions or additional how-tos that you can use if you need to. And this budget worksheet, there's one for each month. So there's one for January, there's one for February, there's one for March, and so on, all the way to December. That's it for entering your budgets.